This is The Change Physician, episode 116. Welcome back to The Change Physician. I am Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. How are you today?
I am well. How are you doing?
I'm good. You didn't expect me to ask how you're doing so fast, did you?
No, I know that was like really, really sudden. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to panic here. I'm responding.
You weren't prompted that this was
I,
going to happen.
I wasn't
Um,
prompted. Yeah, it changed my body state all of a sudden. My
so
heart's
did I
going up a
make
little
you
bit.
nervous?
You may have made me a little bit nervous when I didn't know what
Oh,
was, it was unexpected thing
see?
to occur.
What a great segue for today's, topic. Of course, our topic is why nervous is normal. And so, Kevin's reaction is normal. You're suddenly put on the spot without like any idea of what you're going to say. I mean, you can come up with stuff to say. It's just, when things are unexpected or maybe you have some other reasons that you might be nervous. It's normal to kind of process these weird or experience these physiological responses. So anyone that's nervous knows, and that would be all of us have probably experienced this some more
Well,
than others.
start off with your story. Tell us,
Okay.
that kind of instigated
I
this
love
whole
it when you just
discussion
pull
point.
me right back in. No, so we're having a conversation about, and of course, no patient names will be shared here, but it's not uncommon. In fact, it's extremely normal and common for anyone that's going to have surgery that they get nervous about not only the surgery, but maybe the anesthesia. And so, what's interesting is that this particular conversation with a patient was, I haven't really been nervous about this surgery, but suddenly when I know that someone's going to change a little bit about my nose, it I feel a lot more nervous about this than any other surgery or anesthesia I've had. So at that moment, I told the patient, "Okay, would you be okay listening to my take on that?" And so, I could go into that right now, which kind of sums up a lot of things we're probably going to talk about. But I think it's important for people to realize that your body is meant to look out for you. It's meant to protect you. I mean, heck, even in relationships, what do you fixate on? You probably fixate on the negative or the things that you don't like or that seem threatening to the way you want things to be done. And so sometimes it's hard to focus on the positive, but our brain's body, really, it's one unit, y'all. It's not like separated. But it's this poor little brain who's never seen the light of day only gets a perception based on all the information that you're perceiving. And Kevin's the expert at all these different proprioception and sensations and all these things that your eyes, what you smell, what you feel, all these things are giving information to the brain to create some story, some understanding of what the outside world is posing as far as a threat potentially to you. So I told this patient, of course, your face, that's an area that seems a little threatening, and or some little areas permanently being changed by somebody else, and you have to trust that person to maybe do a good job. So that was where all this started from, and I think Kevin said, we should do an episode. So there you go.
And the reason this is important is because we have both positive and negative state, right? So if you look at valence and arousal, and we're looking at kind of emotions, valence being whether it's more pleasurable versus unpleasurable, and arousal being, is it activating or is it more, calm and lethargic? And you can sort of pull apart these two wings, these two arms to emotion in any way, shape, or form. And there's this myth somehow that if you are calm or excited and it's pleasurable, that's normal. But if you are somehow now, it's unpleasant, even if it's a calm state or aroused state, but it's unpleasant, that's not normal. And so we start to kind of pathologize.
Good
I'm supposed
job.
to look that up. These negative states, when in fact they're completely normal. And I see it, the media will kind of focus on this stuff. You see it with regards when things comes to anxiety many times. I think that's the biggest one I see, where people say, instead of saying, I'm nervous in this situation, and this is normal because of this contextual environment I'm in, the state, the uncertainty, the people I'm with, the newness, all the stuff, then we seem to default and say, well, I'm anxious. And then someone says, well, that feeling's wrong. You have anxiety. Now, granted, we are not talking about, again, pathologic emotions here or those extremes, but we need to remember that everything that our brains and bodies experiences are designed in such a way to protect us and get us to be able to kind of work through this whole living experience. And so all those negative things, we're talking about anxious feelings, depressive feelings, those can and often are normal. And so we need to be appreciative of the fact that if your emotions and your physiological state is swinging back and forth the way it is supposed to, we will have those experiences. And so nervous is normal. Being somewhat depressed is normal. And if you appreciate that and recognize that, I just think it's really, really crucial, because now we can go through those. We can ride them like a wave. We can ride those emotional states like a wave from their beginning to their end, and then catch whatever the next wave, whether that's a positive wave or a negative wave, rather than fighting on the top of this. Then we get stuck, right?
Yeah.
And we're on the top of this negative wave and we're sitting here digging and flailing around. This is not normal. This is not normal. And then you tend to get stuck there, or at least, or you start focusing on it, or you start seeing it more, or the next time that wave occurs, it becomes even worse, because now you're more scared, you're more uncertain associated with it. You think, you have all this idea that somehow it is not the way it's supposed to be. So nervous is normal. Negative states are normal. Obviously, we're not talking about the super extremes when you need clinical care here, but in a normal day, in a normal week, in a normal life, we should be able to float through those positives and negatives, just like a boat's floating through the ocean.
So it begs the question, when certain people pursue medical help, because we have medicalized this, we have anxiety like it's a thing that we've been burdened with. And granted, things do happen in life, and any of us can feel these things, but these are these are sensations or feelings that are uncomfortable. And so the question is, are what are we feeling? How are we interpreting that experience? Is it feel like, that this, you think, okay, I realize awareness. I realize that, oh, I just lost my dog, and, I'm processing this, and I need to, grieve. I need to go for a walk. Like, you have the resources and understanding of how you can help yourself process those types of physiological things, especially if there's another type of situation where there's a lot of anxiety. Learning how to breathe well is, another way that people have their own resources to help process it. But the question is, why do they go and get help and get a drug for it? And that's another big, big thing we can talk about. But many times the question is, do people feel helpless, hopeless as a victim, that they can't get out of that situation? Because they're different extremes. Obviously, you talked about the very extreme, but there are people that can be aware of why they're feeling that way, and some people aren't. They don't know why they're feeling that way. And I feel like there are some people that pursue the medical field because they can't make sense of it, or it's just too much for them to handle, and they don't know how to cope or process it. But many times, especially anxiety or depression, we tend to do the things that actually can make it worse. So some of the things with anxiety is, it's uncomfortable. There's avoidance. It's not any different than pain. That's another topic. But avoiding the thing that gives you anxiety, but you really are just feeling it and you don't want to process it because it's too uncomfortable. And so that's why some people use breathing. That's just one example, is trying to breathe through it, let yourself feel the physiology, which heart rate increases, might get sweaty. There's a lot of sensations, your GI distress. We see that a lot right before going to surgery. Just so you know, it's normal. You start feeling like you got to pee every 2 seconds. You need to go defecate every 2 minutes. Your whole nervous system is wired to many systems in your body. So you can manifest the stress and anxiety in different ways. Some people, headaches. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that you can physiologically experience stress or anxiety. And if it magnifies because you're not letting it process, you can actually be on that more extreme version, or panic attacks. I know I'm going on a tangent, but reel me back in, Kevin.
I think we're trying to kind of emphasize again that these negative states that you experience are normal.
Mhm.
But if you fight them or you do the activities to kind of prevent or try to limit the exposure or pull yourself out of that exposure, you're more likely to propagate them
Mhm.
rather than recognizing, hey, what's going on is normal for me. Here's the reason why. Ride through it. And then what you've done now is if you've successfully navigated that negative experience, you've now provided a learning experience for your brain to grow from.
Right.
So that, that's, and we're thinking about resiliency there, is instead of
Yep.
avoiding it, in which case you don't have the chance to learn from the negative experience, what you've now done is created an external or propagated increased fear of that future activity, which actually worsens that negative state for that future scenario.
Right.
So I think that's what we were sort of talking about there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that it sometimes it feels like it's just too much to handle to go through that. And it can be for some people, but there on the other side of it, if you don't, we see plenty of people in the medical field that, you can even look at PTSD patients, like there's desensitization training, there's all different ways of trying to help people. It doesn't have to be as extreme as PTSD, which is just kind of an extreme form of anxiety where you can't, the wiring, it's kind of, it stays as a revved up dysfunctional nervous system that cannot self-regulate. That's kind of the way I like to define it. What are you going to
Yeah,
say?
well, then let's stay away from the highly pathological
Yeah, the
states, right?
clinical state.
The clinical states here, and kind of just reel it back to sort of the normal swing
Every
of
days.
things, the normal everyday swings of things. Because if we're focusing there, and there was something that you mentioned about like how people are getting more attentive to these negative states, and then once you became more attentive to them, then you start questioning whether or not they're normal or right, and then you start thinking there's something wrong with me. And I do think, in general, I'm pretty positive about the computer age, but this is where the problem of social media comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're this idea that we're supposed to be happy all the time, or you're only supposed to experience pleasure in your life, is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
It is absolutely untrue. I guarantee you, if that's the only experiences that you were having, they would actually start to shift, because that is not healthy for you. We need that swing back and forth. But what do we see in the way the media portrays this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a big Instagrammer because I don't take a lot of pictures, but the criticisms I've heard about a lot of these programs or these platforms, these social media platforms, is that everybody is posting themselves in their best state.
Yeah.
And this gives a false sense to people that somehow everybody's happy and their lives are perfect
Right.
all the time.
Right.
And so when you do experience these negative states, which are normal,
Yes.
now you start going, well, how come I saw John from high school on Facebook and his life is perfect and his kids are all Oxford scholars and blah, blah, blah. There must be something wrong with me because my kid got a D in whatever, pre-algebra, something like that. And yeah, so the important thing is one, negative emotions, negative physiological states are completely normal. Your brain and body are designed to have them. It's a protective thing. If you didn't have them, it actually would be really, really bad.
Yeah.
Two, what is being projected in a lot of people's feeds or what people will tell you is going to be artificially positive. Now, if we go back to the physician standpoint, we see this in publications because there's publication bias on positive findings as compared to when we did this experiment and it didn't work. Those
You were
don't get
wrong with your
published.
hypothesis.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that's a different topic, but it's very relevant. We focus on these positives even when it comes to the research, rather than recognizing that again, these negative things are normal. Failure is normal. The people that you see posting on Instagram, the influencers or whoever, they have bad days too. It makes me. This is going to be horrible, but there is one of my favorite haiku that I think about quite often is it says, nobly the abbot deposits his daily stool in the field. So, but what I like about that, it reminds me, so no, you the abbot of the chapel, right? His the influencer of 15th century Japan, very high and mighty.
Mhm.
but he's out there pooping and, crapping in the field, because
Right.
we all have these states where we have to do these things that some people may deem unpleasant. It is completely normal.
Right.
But
Oh,
yeah,
totally agree. It made me think of
totally
something
agree.
else.
Totally agree. You want to go poop in the field with me?
No, not that part, but just that, that there's the ebbs and flows of or the ebb and flow of ebbs and flows,
Ebbs and
ebbs and
flows.
flow of life that is not always perfect. And I and we get caught up sometimes in the sense that we are trying to portray. That could be a totally different episode. um but it's interesting, one of my posts that I ended up spontaneously crying in the middle of talking about something out of gratitude. I was like, oh man, am I gonna post that? And I was like, yep, I'm gonna do it. And you know what, it's probably had the most views. um and it's just the fact that you are trying to be authentic and not just filtering yourself into this perfectionistic type of, I don't know, interest, or like you're gonna, people are gonna like you better, I don't know. But it was important for me to do that, and I'm glad I did it. But there's a vulnerability with that.
There is a vulnerability with it, but I think that's the other part, is if the more we are aware of these, that negative states are, again, normal, and the more, in fact, that we can share them, and not in the way where you're just like wallowing on the floor, like
Oh
we're
yeah.
not saying that, like not in hysteria or histrionics or anything like
Yeah.
that, but being actually open and saying, hey, I'm having a bad day, or I don't feel good, or I'm sad and I'm not sure why, that kind of thing. That vulnerability allows other people to know that no one's human, and it actually validates their own experiences as well.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I do think that's really important. But now let's be, so if we can end this episode,
Mm-hmm.
we talked about, like, well, what are strategies that you would do if someone is in the state where now they're, what would you do to approach these negative physiological states, or what would you recommend to your friends, family, colleagues, or patients?
Yeah. So I mean, if I acknowledge and I'm aware of why I'm feeling anxiety or depression or depressive type feelings, most of the time it's I equip myself with some things that help me process it and let it flow through me. And that could be just going for a walk. Many times, the going for a walk or exercising is increased breathing, but just breathing exercises, whether it's breathe in for several seconds, hold it, and then breathe out. There's a lot of physiological there's a lot of impact from that on the vagus nerve to all the other systems in the body. You can go look up all the technicals on it, but that's a big part of just slowing down your system that might be amped up with, especially with anxiety, or activating other great things, like, especially if you're feeling depressed or talking to somebody. But I would say the first thing is, in the moment, the quickest thing you can access is your own breath, and or go get outside and make yourself feel better in a healthy way, preferably. And some people that don't know why they're feeling the way they do, there's a lot of research that's out there, that they're not quite fully understood why, but expressive writing, whether you write with your hand in the air to process your feelings or things in your subconscious, just letting it flow, not really any type of structure. You could just shred it afterwards. That expressive writing exercise, just even sometimes just a few times, can be powerful. And then if you're really having trouble understanding where this is coming from, or problems processing it or knowing how to do that, there are people that can help you, whether psychologist, psychiatrist, preferably someone who has some integrative approaches that are very, not just what they can do to you or give you, but things you can do to help yourself.
Yeah. So I would kind of summarize in kind of a steps, like the number one thing, which comes up over and over again in the podcast, is awareness. And in this situation, it would be specifically noticing that the state that you're in.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself being activated and you feel that there's a negative, is actually to be consciously become, oh, look, my heart's higher, I'm nervous, right? So we're noticing the state. The second thing that you kind of talked about here was being able to accept or acknowledge it, acknowledge the fact that you are nervous, or maybe anxious, or maybe you're depressed, whatever the negative emotion is. And then we kind of write it out or process it. And we can do it by, one, interrupting that distressful, if you're highly activated, what you said, with breath, like 3 to 6 slow, deep breaths. It sort of creates a pause there. And if something that is lasting for some degree of time, when we were talking about expressive writing, what you're trying to do is actually get that out. So you're getting your brain from saying, what if, making all these scenarios, these predictions in the brain that's going on. If you can actually get those out in some way, either talking through them, or writing them down, drawing the picture, what you've taken all those what ifs and you make it a little bit more concrete, so you allow to process it. And then I'm going to echo you on the end here when it comes to, if you are at a point where you're finding this recurrent and you're having your difficult time struggling with these negative states, which again are normal, we just need to learn to move through them. I would highly recommend talking to someone who will avoid a pharmacologic approach to this. Again, we're not talking about the far different end here. We're talking about the normal kind of ebb and flow that perhaps we haven't had training, perhaps we came from an environment, we were in a childhood that we weren't exposed to challenges. LCSW, psychologist, a mental health professional that doesn't have prescriptive authority would be my number one recommendation, because in that situation, the tools that they're going to have are the tools that you can learn, rather than the danger with a psychiatrist. And this is not to say all psychiatrists are like this, but unfortunately what they've kind of moved into is the pharmacological road, where you walk in, you say, I'm anxious. They say, well, here, we're going to give you an anti-anxiety med.
Right.
And again, there's time and place for those, but the vast majority of the time, it's not the technique that someone does to you, but it's the tools that you learn that you can apply that'll actually allow you to grow, ride those waves of the negative emotions, which actually will then allow you to slip right onto the more positive waves as well. So that's where I would say.
Before you close out, I just want to make one comment, is that if you are, someone that has a prescriptive authority, it definitely, there's a risk there that you could be offered something that maybe you don't truly need. Doesn't mean it won't affect you, maybe in a slightly positive way, but the problem is you haven't given a chance to all these other things that can be helping you without those risks. And I see time and time again, including multiple people I've spoken to today on telemedicine, they get on these medicines and then yet they still have some problems, and coming off them are really, really hard. And the withdrawal effects are so hard. So, and the other thing, the flip side to that is that everyone feels when they're in a place where they're going to somebody that what their experience is legitimate enough that requires maybe that thing. Like it's the worst feeling and they don't want it anymore. But that doesn't invalidate the non-prescriptive approaches, because some people have worked themselves out of some of the intense, and I don't mean life-threatening or extreme situations. You might need help in those extreme situations for a short period of time, but all these other things are still important regardless of the things you can do to help yourself. So I guess my point is that sometimes, just like in other realms that we've talked about in other episodes and podcasts, other podcasts we've done, that if you just feel like it's bad enough, or I need something to fix me, you set yourself up sometimes and don't recognize the power you have within yourself to help yourself. So anyway, that was my last little token.
Well, and I think that is an extremely important, valuable point. That's a reason that we, in many ways, for a lot of the episodes around this podcast, is you could either sit and hide and try to take the easy way, in which case you will now have a hard life, or you can take some of those more difficult steps to learn, become aware of, process, learn, get the tools, fail sometimes, and grow, in which case your life gets steadily better over time. And that's, I think, was sort of the message between the Changed Physician podcast. So good thing that you brought that in and tied it into the overall theme here. But anything else?
No, I think you can take us out.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today on the Changed Physician podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my fabulous, amazing, salacious, not salacious, co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady. You can join us at the community at thechangedphysician.com. Be sure to give us a rating on your favorite podcast network or video platform. And until next time, stay well.
Take care.